Logan, I believe, is at work as well. Hannah sent out a message just before services that she got a call from Andrew just a little bit ago with some discouraging news that right now it's up in the air as to whether or not she's going to get to go down there and see him because of COVID now. So that's understandably upsetting. I think he left back in July or August, so it's been a while since they've been able to see one another. So let's keep them in our prayers. Also spoke with Jim Thornton today, and Cheryl's doing great. He said she's doing much better. He, however, had knee replacement surgery on Monday, so he needed that procedure for a while, but purposely waited until she was back and healthy again because he wasn't going to be able to help her out. But in his words, she said she's doing great. Today was his first day of physical therapy after his surgery on Monday, and he's in quite a bit of pain, but doing good and on the upswing. So lots to keep in our prayers there. So let's keep that in mind. And then also one side announcement, did post the 2021 cleaning schedule in the bulletin board on the back. So take a look at it and sign up for whatever month is available for you, and let's get that filled up before the end of the year. Before Dan leads us in our opening prayer, we're going to sing number 384. Count your blessings. 384. When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings and one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Count your blessings and one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done. Are you ever burdened with the load of care? Does the cross seem heavy? You are told to bear. Count your many blessings, every down will fly, and you will be singing as the days go by. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done. So what is the conflict, whether great or small? Do not be discouraged, God is over all. Count your many blessings in the will of ten. Help and comfort give you to your journey's end. Count your blessings one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done. I wrote new prayer.
With me. Father, we come to you this evening thankful for this good day that you've given us. Thankful, Father, for this time of midweek that we'll gather together, Father, that we spend an hour focused on study, focused on who your Son and the Word that's left for us. Thankful, Father, for this opportunity we have, the place we're able to meet in. We pray, Father, that as we gather together, we can do so in a manner that's safe, also in a manner that's pleasing and right in your sight. Thankful, Father, for the Word that's been preserved for us. It gives us the insights that we need to live in a way pleasing to you on the earth. Thankful, Father, that we have a good number who are with us this morning, eager and interested in learning more about spiritual things. We pray, Father, that as we go through this study, we can put aside self, we can put aside own earthly concerns or preconceived notions. We can simply examine your word, Father, take it at face value, that we can consider the things that are presented tonight and how our own lives measure up to it. If we find areas where we need to make correction, we might be willing to do so. Also, Father, that we can retain these things, that we can seek application in our own lives later on, and opportunity to share them with others as well. We pray, Father, for this congregation and the work here in this area. We can continue spreading the gospel here in this community, understanding through your word that one of the most important tasks that's been left to us with our time upon the earth. Ask you to watch over as we go through this study. We offer this prayer in your Son's most holy name. Amen.
Okay, so you kids and I have been going over Judges for the last few weeks, right? Do you remember the names of any specific judges we talked about? I got a mumble from Dominic, but I don't think there was a name in there. Ethan?
I think we studied Gideon.
We talked about Gideon, that is right. Who else? Lucinda?
Yeah.
You say Samson? That's right. We talked about Samson. Those are the two that we talked about the most. What did we learn about Gideon? I'm skeptical of that, buddy. What was Gideon famous for? You remember he led some men into battle? How many men was it? Titus? 13. It was more than that. It was more than that. There was a 3 involved. Ethan?
17?
It was more than that. If we keep guessing like this, it's going to take us a while to get there. No one remembers? So he started out with a huge army, okay? Thousands of men came together in order to fight, and God said, no, that's too many. That's too many. You guys are going to think that you did it if you go into battle like that. So he whittled it down, and Titus, how many were left at the end? 300. Okay, he worked through it and figured it out. 300 were left. Okay, so with those 300 men, he led them into the battle. And really what he did was he surrounded the enemy and scared them, and they ended up fighting themselves and taking care of the problem on their own. So was it the 300 who were successful, or was something else behind it? 100. Ethan?
God actually made the others fight.
It was God. That's right. So God was the one who was really behind it, and that's what he was trying to do when he said, "You've got too many men." He made them. He made a lot of them go home so that it would be clear they hadn't been victorious on their own. So that it would be clear God was really the one who did it for them. Okay, what did we learn about Samson? Ethan?
He ripped open a lion.
Yeah, he ripped open a lion with his bare hands. That's pretty impressive. Did I see a hand go up in that row from one of you guys? Titus?
He's strong.
He was really strong. Well, you'd have to be in order to tear open a lion, wouldn't you? What else?
He also had long hair.
You got some? Hang on a second, Ethan. You got something?
He said he's strange, but he meant strong.
Oh, his strength. Yeah. Well, good job. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up yet. What you got, Ethan?
He had long hair.
He had long hair. He had very long hair. Now, is that just a fashion choice? Why did he have long hair, Titus?
So that he'd be strong.
So that he'd be strong. Okay, that's sort of kind of right. But if I grew out my hair really long, would that make me super strong too? Lucinda? God made him strong. That's right. And so God had told him, among other things, that he was not to cut his hair, and God gave him his strength. Okay, so did Samson always have that super strength? No? What happened? What happened to him?
A woman.
Titus? Titus?
He was sent to jail.
Say it again.
He was sent to jail.
Somebody cut his hair, didn't they? Right? Do you remember the name? Sawyer, do you remember what it was?
What was it? Delilah.
I think, is he trying to say Delilah?
Delilah.
Delilah. So Delilah is the woman who cut his hair. That's right. So when that happened, his strength went away, and then the Philistines were able to come and take him and imprison him, weren't they? Okay. So that's a pretty sad ending to the story for Samson, right? Did he ever get his strength back? Titus?
Yes,
Huh?
he did.
He did? How?
Because of God.
Say again?
Because of God.
Because of God? That's right. So his hair started to grow again, and he prayed to God for strength one more time, and God gave it to him. And so he was able to knock down the temple of the idol that he was being paraded in. Okay, good job, kid. That was a pretty good review of those two judges. Now, we talked on Sunday about the book of Judges overall. And you remember what we said about the children of Israel and all of the problems that they had, especially in the book of Judges. Why was that? Why did they keep having such a rough time? Anybody remember? What made life so difficult for them? So all the nations that lived around them, they kept coming in. And in the case of Gideon, it was the Midianites. In the case of Samson, it was the Philistines. In the case of other judges, it was sometimes other nations. They came in and they were stealing the Israelites' food. They were making them into slaves. They were making life very difficult for them. Well, how were they able to do that if God was with the Israelites? Any ideas? You don't remember? Were the Israelites really obeying God? Titus?
They forgot about God.
Say it again.
They forgot about God.
They forgot about God. That is right. So they... You got something, Sawyer?
Late for God.
Okay, so they forgot about God. They started worshiping idols instead, and they stopped keeping God's commandments. And when they did that, God said, okay, well then I'm not going to protect you anymore. And that's when life started to get really difficult for them. And so you remember we said that's going to work out pretty much the same way for us most of the time. When we pay attention to God and His instructions, things are going to go a lot better for us. Okay, so we've got two songs that we'll go over, and then we'll talk for a couple of minutes about Ruth. So let's go over the names of all the judges. God sent judges over Israel, one great woman, 13 men. They helped Israel fight their battles, led them back to God from sin. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, Samuel. Okay, and then we did, last week I taught you the song about the book of Judges. So let's sing this one as well. Take a look in the book of Judges. Take a look and you'll see trouble after trouble, sorrow after sorrow for the people of the Lord. Take a look in the book of Judges. Take a look and you'll see a whole generation of God's holy nation grew up not knowing the Lord. And the people did what was right. They did. The people did what was right. They did. The people did what was right. They did what was right in their own eyes. And the people did what was evil. They did. The people did what was evil. They did. The people did what was evil. They did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Okay, good job. Now let's talk for a couple of minutes about Ruth. So this is during basically that same time, but toward the end of it, and there was a famine in the land of Israel. And so there was a man who went with his wife and his 2 sons, and they crossed over the Jordan River, and they went to live in a different place called Moab. And while they were there, his 2 sons got married. So they each found a wife among the Moabites, and they got married. And then the man died. The father died. And so did both of his sons. And so these 3 women were left. Naomi is sort of the mother, and then these 2 young ladies, one's named Orpah, and the other one is named Ruth. And eventually Naomi decides, well, I might as well go back home. Why am I here? I don't have any family here. I don't have any connections here. And I hear that there's actually food back home in Israel again. So she decides she's going to get up and leave. And she tells her daughters-in-law, why don't you go back to your families, and then you can go, you get married again, and everything will be better for you that way. And Orpah says, okay, I don't want to do that, but I will. But Ruth says, no. Ruth said, I'm going to go with you, Naomi. And wherever you go, that's where I'm going to go. Where you live, that's where I'm going to live. The God you worship, that's who I'm going to worship. And so she stayed with Naomi. And Naomi took her back home. But it's not like life was super easy once they got back to Israel. Naomi was an old lady, and Ruth was an unmarried woman, and she had to go out into the fields and pick up the grain that was being dropped after the harvesters. And she took that home, and she was able to feed them off of that for a while. But while that was happening, she met a very nice man named Boaz. Can you guys say Boaz? Boaz is going to end up being pretty important. Because eventually, Boaz marries Ruth. So that takes care of the problem, doesn't it? Now Boaz can take care of Ruth. He can take care of Naomi and sort of have her as his adopted mother-in-law, so to speak. And what ends up happening is that Boaz and Ruth have a baby. And that guy's name, that guy has a baby, and then that guy has a baby, and that baby is King David. Okay? So you guys know who King David is, right? What did David do? What's David most famous for? Not sure what you're saying, Sawyer. Come on, guys, you know this one. Titus, what did David do?
He won a bunch of battles.
Say it again.
He won a bunch of battles.
He won a bunch of battles. Okay, what was the first battle that he won? Go ahead, Titus.
Beating Goliath.
Against Goliath, that's right. So David fought against Goliath. That's probably what he's most famous for. So that David who fought the giant and killed him because God was with him, his great-grandmother was this lady, Ruth, that we were just talking about. So Ruth went with Naomi, and she stuck with her, and she was good to her mother-in-law and took care of her and trusted in God, and things worked out very well for them. Okay, we will review Ruth and move on next time. Thanks, guys. Now, for the adults, we are doing another character study this evening, and we are going to look at Silas. I imagine my son is probably going to be looking up at me confusedly a few times here, but that notwithstanding. So the name Silas, I figure we should start with that because it's going to help us to understand some of what follows here. The name Silas is a shortened form of the name Silvanus, and that's the name that we see him going by in the letters later on, but throughout the book of Acts, he's always called Silas. That name is a Latin name. It has an association with forest, so it's kind of like woodsman, something like that. And that being the case, what would you say that his name suggests about his origins? Or does the question make any sense? Say again? So it's Latin. Misty, you had your hand up?
I would say it's Roman.
Okay, yeah, it would suggest a Roman origin. And in fact, we do see something like that. We'll go there in a little bit here, but in Acts chapter 16, verse 25, and then also verse 37, it indicates that he is a citizen, because Paul and Silas are in prison, and he says that they have beaten us, men who are Roman citizens. And it's just Paul and Silas. So we know Paul is a citizen. That comes up later. Apparently Silas was also a Roman citizen. He's also got this Latin name, so some sort of Roman origin. Okay. But his first appearance is in Acts chapter 15. And I'm going to go ahead and read the verse where he shows up. Verse 22 of Acts 15. Then it seemed good to the apostles and the elders with the whole church to choose men from among them and send them to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas. They sent Judas called Barsabas and Silas, leading men among the brothers. And they send the letter from the church at Jerusalem, basically saying, look, the doctrine about Gentiles needing to become Jews in order to be Christians is not the case, and it didn't come from us. Sorry about any confusion, and the Gentiles are not bound to keep the law of Moses. So, Silas was one of the men that they chose to send for that. So, what else do we learn about his origins just from this little detail? Nancy? Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
He was a Christian.
Uh-huh.
And he was of Jerusalem.
That's right.
So I saw somewhere where it said he was like a Hellenistic Jew.
Yeah. So, okay, yeah. So you're jumping one step ahead, but we'll catch up to you in a minute here. Obviously, he's one of these early Christians. He was residing at Jerusalem. He's part of the church there, and he's called a leading man. Obviously, just given the composition of the church at this time, that means he's Jewish. And yet we've got this Roman name and a Roman citizenship, and that suggests what you were getting at, Nancy, that he's almost certainly a Hellenist. So a Jew, but not one who only spoke Hebrew, or maybe one who didn't speak Hebrew at all, but who spoke Greek as his native language. Now, why was Silas chosen for this task, bearing this letter to the church at Antioch? Tim?
Well, he was a leading man, but it seemed good to the apostles and elders choose men from among them. So for whatever requirements they gave, these men, were the obvious choices, and so there shows some leadership qualities there, and if they're going to represent, be able to converse, that he was a good somebody who could present his case and discuss and think through that kind of person that would be.
Yeah, so he's actually called a leading man at the end of verse 22 there, and obviously he's someone that they felt adequately represented them and could communicate that was trustworthy and responsible. On top of that, there's this detail about him being. I'm sorry, go ahead, Misty.
I was like, if you read down in verse 26, it said that they have risked their lives. So to support that in the name of Jesus, so they obviously defended the faith.
Yeah. So these are very strong Christians, Harley.
And like when you look at it, we talked about how Silas was probably a Hellenistic Jew. Judas was almost certainly just a Jew.
What makes you say that?
Well, the name Judah.
Well, Judas Barsabas is a deliciously Hebrew name, yes.
And so if you send both Judas and Silas, then you would presumably have, a Hellenistic Jew and a Jew.
A Hebrew Jew, yeah. Yeah. And I suspect, I can't say this definitively, but suspect very strongly that that's a major component to why they chose these two guys. Because of the question that they're addressing, they're trying to bridge the gap between Jewish Christians and now Gentile Christians. They're trying to bridge the gap between the Hebrew Jewish Christians who were very dedicated to the law of Moses, and now these Hellenistic Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians who are a little bit more easily able to say that's not a requirement of Christians. They're trying to bridge that gap, and so they send someone who is extremely Jewish and also someone who is more able to converse with the Gentiles. So it's pretty clever of them. They're taking into account these little details in order to help bring about what is necessary, what is needed for God's kingdom. And it works out quite well. Who would like to read verses 30 through 35 of Acts 15 for us? Go ahead, Denise.
So when they were sent away, they went down to Antioch, and having gathered the congregation together, they delivered the letter. And when they had read it, they rejoiced because of its encouragement. And Judas and Silas, also being prophets themselves, encouraged and strengthened the brethren with a lengthy message. And after they had spent time there, they were sent away from the brethren in peace to those who had sent them out. But it seemed good to Silas to remain there. But Paul and Barnabas stayed in Antioch, teaching and preaching with many others the word of the Lord.
Okay, thank you, Denise. So, what other important little tidbit have we learned about Silas? A prophet. So there's a spiritual gift component that this guy has as well. That seems important. And okay, so we're seeing that this whole endeavor went pretty well, right? He went to Antioch along with Judas, along with Paul and Barnabas. They delivered the letter. Things go well. A crisis averted. They've dealt with the problem. Okay, all's good. And then we've got Paul and Barnabas hanging out in Antioch. And then we come down to verse 39. And who would like to read verses 39 through 41? Nancy?
And there occurred such a sharp disagreement that they separated from one another, and Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. I forgot the one before. Did you want me to go from 36?
Through 41, please.
36. Okay. After some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us return and visit the brethren in every city in which we proclaim the word of the Lord, and see how they are." Barnabas wanted to take John, called Mark, along with them also. But Paul kept insisting they should not take him along, who had deserted them in Pamphylia, and had not gone with them to the work. And there occurred such a sharp disagreement that they separated from one another. And Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and left, being committed by the brethren to the grace of the Lord. And he was traveling through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches.
Okay, thank you. So, why did Paul choose Silas for this? Nancy?
Well, Silas, there was no contention between them. And he had already proven himself when they came to Antioch. So, knowing that Barnabas was going off with Mark, who he didn't want to take with him, chose to take Silas.
Yeah, that speaks pretty well of Silas, doesn't it? I mean, he's been out with Barnabas before, and they were very effective. They were a good team. Paul is determined that he's going to go back out and visit these churches that he's already established and continue to preach the gospel in new places. And when the dream team of Paul and Barnabas breaks up, he looks around and says, "Silas, that is a good candidate. I want that guy." And it's interesting to me that it's not that, Silas joined up and said, "I'd like to go with you." It's that he chose Silas, as if he approached him and said, "I think you would do this well. Are you willing?" And Silas agreed, and so it all began. So, again, the same sort of thing works in Silas's favor here, and therefore in favor of the Lord and the spread of his message, that he's able to bridge the gap between Jews and Gentiles pretty effectively. He sort of has a foot in each circle. Not only that, he's got spiritual gifts that Denise mentioned a couple of minutes ago. There's already the sort of a friendship between Paul and Silas because they've spent time together on the journey up to Antioch, and they've shared in this endeavor to smooth over the issue between the church in Antioch and the church in Jerusalem. And on top of that, well, he just needed some help. And so Silas is there, and so it begins. It's kind of a happy accident to some extent. Now, you can read the regions that they went through, and I put this in the email, so I don't know if you guys had a chance to go through and try to catalog these, but what churches at a minimum did Silas visit with Paul and help, and in some cases help establish?
It sounds like Derby and Lystra.
Okay, Derby and Lystra.
Philippi.
Philippi would be one of them, yeah.
Jailed together. Later they going back in Corinth, right?
Yes, he would have been in Corinth as well.
Of course, there's something between Lystra and Derby. So
That's right.
This could be Antioch.
Antioch with Pisidia is in there.
Iconium could be.
Iconium is in there.
Troas.
Troas. It's not so. Yeah, he's not with Paul when Paul's at Troas. But there are two more: Thessalonica and Berea. It's possible. It's not completely clear based on Acts. It doesn't appear to be the case. But when you look at the First and Second Thessalonians, there seems to be a small case that he might have helped Paul briefly in Athens as well. But I kind of doubt that happened. But that's a pretty good list: Lystra, Derbe, Iconium, Antioch, Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, and Corinth. That's a pretty busy year and a half or so, isn't it? They were just going, and doing a whole lot of hard work. Okay, and that's like two sentences, and we brush past a whole bunch of effort that Silas put in, and that's all that we really know about it. But his standout performance is in chapter 16, verses 19 through 40. I'll tell you what, why don't we break this up? Who would like to read verses 19 through 24? Matt will take that. And then who would like to take 25 through 34 after that? Tim? And then Dustin, do you want to take 35 through 39 after that? Thank you. I'm sorry, 35 through 40. Go ahead, Matt.
Did you say 16?
You'll be doing 19 through 24.
Of chapter 16.
Of chapter 16.
Okay. But when her masters saw that their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to the authorities. And they brought them to the magistrates and said, "These men, being Jews, exceedingly trouble our city. And they teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or observe." Then the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. And then when they had laid many stripes on them, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. Having received such a charge, he put them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks.
Okay, Tim?
But about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns and praise to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there came a great earthquake, so the foundations of the prison house were shaken. And immediately all the doors were open and everyone's chains were unfastened. When the jailer awoke and saw the prison doors open, he drew a sword and was about to kill himself, supposing that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." And he called for lights and rushed in, and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. And after he brought them out, he said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him, together with all who were in his house. And he took them that very hour of the night and washed their wounds, and immediately he was baptized, he and all his household. And he brought them into his house and set food before them, and rejoiced greatly, having believed in God with his whole household.
But when it was day, the magistrates sent the police, saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Therefore, come up now and go in peace." But Paul said to them, "They have beaten us publicly, uncondemned, being for Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison, and do they now throw us out secretly? No, let them come themselves and take us out." The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. So they went out of the prison and visited Lydia, and when they had seen the brothers, they encouraged them and departed.
Okay, thank you guys. So, Paul clearly kind of takes the lead in all of this. There are a number of times where Paul is the one who speaks up, and then there are a bunch of times where they speak up. They do this and that and the other thing. Throughout this whole thing, what kind of attitude does Silas pretty clearly maintain? Nancy?
It's pretty much he's steadfast in with God, with Christ, because he prays with Paul, he sings the hymns, and even though that they were both beaten, but he doesn't complain. He's strict.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? We don't see him taking the lead. We don't see him, standing up and kind of being this extremely hard-hitting go-getter type character. But he also doesn't have any whining to do. He's not complaining. He's not like John Mark might have been doing right about now, saying, "I'm not so sure that I want to be involved with this." He just plugs along, kind of quietly in the background, continuing to do his work. And then when the opportunity comes for him to share God's message and to preach the gospel, he takes it. And he's right there with Paul preaching to this jailer in his household. He's right there with Paul singing and praying audibly so that everybody, all these other prisoners can hear. That itself was an act of evangelism. He just keeps on going with apparently no complaints, quiet and confident, and suffers together with Paul and speaks up when it furthers God's kingdom. Okay, in chapter 17, verses 10 through 15, I'll go ahead and read these. This is after Paul and Silas have spent some time in Thessalonica. Beginning of verse 10. The brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea, and when they arrived, they went into the Jewish synagogue. Now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word in all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Many of them therefore believed, with not a few Greek women of high standing as well as men. But when the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was proclaimed by Paul at Berea also, they came there too, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul off on his way to the sea, but Silas and Timothy remained there. Those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. Okay, so Paul is clearly the leader here. We just mentioned that with regard to the story about the jail at Philippi and everything. He's the driving force of this team. Do you think that Timothy and Silas were pretty much incompetent maybe without Paul?
No, they wouldn't have been leading men in their own church.
Say again, Nancy? Oh.
No, they wouldn't have been leading men within their own church if they were incompetent.
Okay, yes, thank you. So there's no reason to suspect that. And in fact, we can't really tell all that clearly here from this reading, but when you go and stitch together the timeline of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, it's pretty clear that it's not like Silas and Timothy were just sitting around. They were going back and forth. They were carrying messages. They were preaching. They were trying to strengthen and encourage these various congregations. In fact, Silas, it looks like he's going back and forth to Thessalonica as well as Berea before he catches up with Paul at Corinth. So it looks like, Paul, when he leaves, he says in verse 15, he gives the command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible. That right there is a mark of their value to him, right? He's going to miss having them to help, isn't he? And in fact, he doesn't accomplish as much as he normally would have on his own. In Athens, it's kind of a flop. Okay, in chapter 18, in verse 1, we see Paul arriving at Corinth. And then in verse 5, Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, and they are reunited finally with him there. And that's the last that we really see of Silas in the book of Acts. He does show up a few more times in the letters, and we're not going to read a whole ton here, but I'm just going to mention a couple of times. In 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, the first verse of each of those lists Silvanus as one of the senders or authors of these letters. So Paul and Silvanus. I think Timothy is also in that list for one or both of them. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, he's mentioned specifically in verse 19, along with Timothy again. And Paul is not treating him like an afterthought, but as a full partner in the work that they did. In 2 Corinthians 1:19, for the Son of God, Jesus Christ, whom we proclaimed among you, Silvanus and Timothy and I, was not yes and no, but in him it is always yes. And then later in that same letter, chapter 11, verse 9, the name Silas or Silvanus doesn't pop up, but again, stitching together the narrative with Acts and Thessalonians, it's pretty clear that he is one of these brothers that came from Macedonia in chapter 11, verse 9, who brought support for Paul from the Christians in Macedonia, presumably from Philippi and possibly Berea. Probably not from Thessalonica for reasons we'll get into another time. So, we see Silas doing a lot of work, again, kind of in the background, but he's still there. He's still plugging along. He's still working hard. That's the last time that he's mentioned in Paul's letters. 2 Corinthians was written around 55 AD. Around 64 AD, 9 years later, Peter wrote 1 Peter. And there in 1 Peter chapter 5, we find Silas once again. If I can get there. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 12, Peter says, by Silvanus, a faithful brother as I regard him, I have written briefly to you, exhorting and declaring that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. So now Silas is working with Peter. Any idea why he wouldn't be working with Paul anymore?
Paul is dead.
Paul is dead, is the short answer. We don't know that for absolutely certain, but I'm like one step away from absolutely certain. Paul is dead, and that's why Peter is writing this letter to these people at this time. And that's why he writes by Silvanus. Because of that association with Paul, he's using that bridge. So Silas is always a bridge, isn't he? He's using that bridge between himself and these people that knew and loved Paul so well to try to replace Paul in some sense and try to provide for their loss in that situation. By now, Peter and Silas are at Rome, and we don't really know anything about Silas after that. That's not a whole lot of information about this guy. But what kind of meaningful, useful conclusions can we draw from these sporadic details about this man's life that matter to us today? Tim?
Well, he's mentioned several times as being encouraging. So he's one that doesn't think so much about himself first, but he thinks about what others may need from him and how he can serve them and be a good brother in that regard.
Yeah, as we go through, and again, it's kind of sporadic. I'm sure that the details that we have, they obviously leave out faults. We don't know of any faults in Silas, and obviously he had some, right? Everybody does. We just don't know about them in his case. But what we do see from him very consistently is that he's not promoting himself. He's not even like a Paul type character where he's just itching to jump into the fray and get this work done. Paul approaches him and says, "Hey, you want to help me do this?" And Silas goes, "Okay." And he's that kind of a person who he has to be asked, but once he's asked, he gets involved and he works hard. He's not interested in making a name for himself, but he's interested in getting the work done. And he's an encouragement to the people around him. And that's a great example for us to follow. What else? Matt?
He was obviously respected because, as you mentioned, Peter used him as kind of a go-between of, hey, I'm with this guy, like somebody they're familiar with. So he was obviously respected by many.
So he had kind of developed a persona already. He was recognized as a leading man in the Church of Jerusalem, and that allowed him to be this bridge, to be this person that kind of is a mediator or go-between in a whole lot of different instances. That's also a great thing for us to emulate when we have the opportunity. Nancy?
He was steadfast and faithful even through tribulations, through beatings.
He was being unjustly and illegally beaten with rods. That's not fun, and he doesn't seem to complain. He's thrown in the stocks. He doesn't seem to complain. In fact, instead of, when the tables are turned, instead of saying, you shouldn't have done this, he just preaches the gospel and ends up being instrumental in the salvation of the individual who was responsible. Also a great example for us. Don't return evil for evil. Misty?
We don't seem to read a lot of what he may have said or taught. But in all these groups where it talks about Paul, there's other people there, and I think it's interesting that Silas is one of only 2 or 3 individuals that are called out as traveling with him.
That's right.
Consistently over time.
That's right. Especially in chapter, let's see, I guess it's in chapter 17 of Acts. As far as we know, that crew is Paul, Silas, and Timothy. Well, we all know Timothy. He's pretty important later on, right? But he's not mentioned most of the time. It's Paul and Silas, even though Timothy's there with them. Luke is there with them as well for at least part of chapter 16, and that's not made all that clear either. It's Paul and Silas, Paul and Silas, Paul and Silas. So clearly he was worth his weight in gold to Paul and in that work they were doing. Also a great example for us. Others? What we see in Silas is someone who behaves respectably, respectfully, with dignity, and that approach never seems to lead him astray. We see a quiet, hard worker with endurance, which is also an approach that we ought to emulate. He's always useful. He's always helpful. He maintains a great attitude even under stress, and he always remembers why he's doing what he's doing. When he's thrown in prison, he prays and sings hymns and then preaches the gospel. Misty?
I mean, by the time we get to 1 Peter, I'm assuming he's pretty up there in years, and yet it calls him a faithful Christian. And I think that's something for us to remember is we may have been a Christian for a long time, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be faithful. And you also look at that, they gave him a job, so just because we're older, that doesn't mean we can't still be working.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He's got a long career. All right, any final comments or questions on Silas? All right, thank you. I hope that was beneficial and edifying for you.
If you'd like to turn to the book of Revelation, chapter 21, we'll be spending a little time there. I first want to forewarn you and just kind of come clean. I have used a lot of this in a previous invitation, but I felt like it was appropriate to revisit right now with a lot of things going on and probably a lot of things on a lot of people's minds. So, of course, here there's a pretty lengthy description of heaven, and there's a lot of details about what it's going to look like and what it's going to be like. And that got me thinking, what do we look forward to? Right now we've got the holidays coming up. Even though it's kind of odd circumstances, we're probably at least going to see a little bit of family, at least be in contact with them. So that's always something to look forward to. Maybe we're looking forward to just this whole year being over with and starting a new one, and hopefully a better one. But there's a lot of things that we're constantly, just looking forward to in our lives. But as Christians, we have something far greater to look forward to. The opportunity of heaven. And as you read here, verses 9 through 22, 23, 25, lots of description there on what heaven's going to look like. And just some highlights there. It's going to exhibit radiance. There's going to be gold, jasper, jewels of all kinds, pearls. It'll be eternal day with no darkness. It sounds like a pretty amazing place to be. And we have that opportunity because of Christ. If you back up to verse 3, something even better, I think, to look forward to. It says God is going to be there. We're going to be in the presence of God in heaven. And continuing on there, verse 4, another great thing to look forward to. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. All the bad things will no longer exist in heaven. We have that to look forward to. I think that's, a really, really great thing to hold on to, especially in difficult times like we've all experienced this year. So let's continue to strive towards that. If you need help becoming a Christian, so you have that opportunity. If you've fallen away, if you are a Christian, we're here to offer you this time to make things right as we sing the song that was selected.
As I journey here in the toilet, the rainbow in the cloud, you will safely lead I must travel. The rainbow in the cloud, rainbow that is shining, there's a rainbow in the cloud. When my face is drawn in the there's a rainbow in the cloud. After storm and rain fills up over, there's a rainbow in the cloud. Winter's cold and May, summer's harvest, there's a rainbow in the cloud. There's a rainbow that is shining. There's a rainbow in the cloud. With my traces running the field. There's a rainbow in the cloud. When the storms all pass, comes the brighter day. There's a rainbow in the cloud. In that city where there's a crown to wear, there's a rainbow in the cloud. There's a rainbow that's shining. There's a rainbow in the cloud. Midnight faces running the beat. There's a rainbow in the cloud. Thank you, Dustin, for good lesson tonight, and Jeremy for good class. Again, let's keep in our prayers those that were mentioned earlier. Of course, we have a number of healthcare workers here. With things going the way they are, we definitely need to keep them in our prayers right now. There's going to be a number that are probably traveling over the next week, so please keep that in your prayers as well. Also, Andrew and Hannah with the unfortunate turn of events that they may not get to see each other here in a couple weeks. So keep them in our prayers, and also Jim and Cheryl as well. Thankful for her recovery. I know we've been praying for her for a while now, and hopefully Jim bounces back quickly as well. Are there any additional?
I'd like to ask everybody, please keep my mother in your prayer. She's been in the hospital. She has the COVID virus, and so we're just kind of be traveling over and doing good combination.
So we're unable to hear that Mark's mom has both COVID and pneumonia and was just admitted to the hospital, so let's keep her in prayer.
If the men can read up here just for a couple minutes after service, so we can discuss something and get something taken care of real quickly. And then, everybody remember Bob Foy, who preached here for Holy Meeting for his wife Marilyn. We announced that Marilyn had breast cancer. They thought it would be not require chemo, but it is going to require chemo. She's going to have exactly the same treatments that Janet had. 4 weeks of double treatment and then 12 weeks of the single treatment. Starting the 28th of December. So they appreciate prayers from the congregation on her behalf as well. Miller has a great uncle that actually made his week, had a combination dealing with cancer and COVID-19. Also, I've got one of my sisters has it as well. It's like a much more mild case. So that for prayers for Valerie's mother's side of the family.
So guys, I think it's good to point out now that, fortunately we've taken a lot of precautions here. It's allowed us to meet together. With the seating arrangement and everything, we've had somebody show up with us that thankfully the things we had put in place worked and will continue to work. So, keep in mind once we do say amen and the closing prayer. I know it's colder now, but we do need to get out the doors. We don't need to linger. We don't need to be running around the building and all that stuff. We need to get out into the parking lot. I guess with the exception of the men and I need to stay 6 feet apart and meet very quickly about something. So, is there anything else that needs to be announced? If not, Brian, I believe, is down for our closing prayer.
Let's pray. Our Holy Father and God, we're thankful, Father, for the opportunity you've given us to be able to come here and to study from your word. And we pray, Father, that we might be able to glean those truths from your servant Silas years ago in his character and the way he conducted himself as a Christian. We pray, Father, that we might be able to emulate the same characteristics, that we might be closer to you and be able to serve you the way that you want us to. We realize, Father, that there are many of our number who are suffering. We pray for Mark's mom. And we pray for others that have been mentioned that are coming in contact with the virus and other illnesses. And we pray, Father, that you look upon them. We pray that you watch over them and keep them safe in these trying times. We pray that you also comfort those who might be suffering from the loss of loved ones. And we know, Father, that through your care and through your love, that you will be able to pull us through these difficult times. We pray, Father, that our faith might be in you and not in the things of this world. And yet, Father, when things come to the worst, we know that we will have a home with you when this life is over. We pray that you'll comfort each and every one of us. We pray that you'll be with us as we depart and keep us safe until the next time, until we can come here and worship you, give you honor, glory, and praise. We offer up this prayer in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus the Christ.